welcome back to my channel. So last week we made homecoming dress number 1 out of my mini series of making 3 different homecoming dresses. And so that means this week we're on to dress number 2. And so the last dress was the beginner friendly dress, so that means this one is going to be the intermediate level. But I was thinking about the design I'm doing and I actually don't think this one is going to be very hard either. So this one would also be a good option if you want to give it a go as a beginner. But if you already have some sewing experience, it should not be very hard. And for this project, I'm really excited about this fabric because I've never worked with anything like this on my channel before. And I got this really pretty sequined fabric from Joann's. And it has this really cute little trim around the top, and I was so in love with it that I bought it even though they didn't have as much as I wanted out of it. So I'm only working with 1.5 yards today, but I would prefer to work with 2 yards. If you guys want to make the skirt a little bit bigger, I would recommend it. I am going to try to make this one work. And then I also bought this lining fabric for it, and this one I did get 2 yards of. And this is honestly the only thing that I could find that semi-matched the color at Joann's. So it's not exactly the fabric I would prefer to be working with because it doesn't have a very nice drape or anything to it, but I'm hoping it'll be good enough for this. But what I would prefer to work with would probably be a charmeuse satin for the lining, just because it has a really nice drape and it looks really expensive. But like I said, I'm not too mad about it because this fabric is so pretty anyway that it's going to be underneath it, so I don't think it's going to matter all too much. And the design I'm going for today is not one that I typically do because it's going to be a very deep V-neck in the front and also one in the back. So I think it'll be really elegant and very pretty. And then I'm also going to try to use this cute little trim around the bottom for the skirt. So I think it's going to be very elegant but very cute. And of course this fabric is just stunning. And for this project I am also working on the patterns. Hopefully they will be out by the time I post this. And I'm going to try to do that for all the homecoming dresses because those have multiple sizing options and it just makes it a lot easier for you guys to print those out and then work with the video. So I hope that makes it a lot easier for you guys to make these dresses, and I hope you guys give them a shot. And that means it is time to start cutting. Because I didn't have the full amount of sequin fabric I would have liked to be working with, I decided to cut out all of my pieces from my lining fabric first to make sure that I wouldn't accidentally miscut something and have to use more of my sequin fabric than I'd want to. And then I used all of those pieces to cut them out of my sequin fabric. And because I really liked the trim on the sequin fabric, I wanted to use that as much as possible. So I placed the larger edge of the front pieces so that it would line up right with the trim and make sure I had a little bit of seam allowance there before cutting it out. And then with the other pieces, I just cut them out of the rest of the sequin fabric. And here are the first pieces that you're going to need. And so these are the 2 front pieces. And for all the pieces we cut out of our sequin fabric, we're basically going to double that for the lining pieces. And then this one is the back, and again, it's going to be 4 out of the lining and 2 out of the sequin. This piece I'm showing you guys here is just the strap piece, and I only cut out one because we're going to cut it in half later. And then this is the lining skirt piece, and this one is just a simple circle skirt so that there is less fabric at the waist. And then this is the sequin skirt, and I didn't cut all of the bottom edges out because I'm going to do that later, but you want the length of it to be 21 inches where it hits the bottom of the sequin. And that is all of the pattern pieces. And again, I'm working on the pattern for you guys, so hopefully that'll be out in a couple of days. Now that we have all of our pieces, the first thing we need to do is we need to baste the sequin fabric layers to one of the lining layers. And so for all of the sequin bodice pieces, I'm just going to baste them to one of the lining layers. I'm going to be using lots of pins to make sure these pieces are laying as flat as possible when I baste them. And then I'm just going to stitch all around the perimeter of these pieces. And on the ones with the little trim here, I think I'm actually going to stitch right around the outside of this detail here because I think that's going to help us on a future step. And a basting stitch is just the longest stitch length on your machine, so I'm going to use my regular straight stitch and just make the length as long as it goes. And these are just to hold it together, so we're going to take them out later in the process. And now that all the sequin pieces have been basted, we're going to bring in the other lining pieces, and we're going to work with the front and side pieces first. So I'm going to take one of our front pieces and one of our side pieces, and the side of the front that is slightly shorter is the top, and we're going to sew that part to the curve here. So I'm going to put these pretty side and pin them together. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other sequin pieces, and then I'm also going to do that to the other lining pieces without any sequins on them. And once these are all pinned together, we can just use a regular straight stitch and sew down that seam. And now you should have 4 pieces that look like this. And now we're going to put all of these to the side and grab the back pieces. And we need to add some darts into the back. So I'm going to take one of our back pieces and fold it in half. And I'm going to match up the bottoms here and make sure that this edge is nice and straight. And then at the bottom, I'm going to take it in for 3/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to measure 7 inches up and put a pin here. And that is where the dart is going to stop and just go back into the fabric. So we're going to stitch a triangle here that just fades back into the fabric at 7 inches. And I'm going to do that on all of the back pieces. Now that the back pieces have the darts, we can bring back the front pieces, and I'm going to sew one back piece to one front piece down the side seams. Now that we've assembled either side of the bodice, it's time to make some straps for the dress. And so I'm just going to take this really long strap piece that we cut out, fold it in half, and then stitch pretty close to that folded over edge all the way down. And now I'm going to just trim down the seam. Then I'm going to use this little tool of mine that has a little hole at the top to turn it right side out by putting it in, putting a few stitches there to hold it in place, and then pulling it through. And now we can cut this piece in half to make our 2 strap pieces. And now we can bring our bodice pieces back in. And before we actually attach the straps, I'm going to put our bodice pieces together pretty side to pretty side. And right down the front seam, I think I'm going to sew them together for about 4 inches. And now we are going to take our straps and I'm going to pin them right at the top here of the bodice. And when you pin them, you just want them to be facing down like this. And once those are pinned, I'm going to take the lining piece and put it pretty side down on top of it. And I'm going to match up and pin all of their edges together. And now before I sew all across the top edge here, I think I want to make a few adjustments to the pattern. One being kind of fixing the shape of the armhole here and just making it more rounded out. And then I think I want the back to be more of an angle. And now I'm going to sew all across the perimeter of this piece except for the very bottom edge, and also I'm going to leave the tops of the backs open so we can put the straps here later. And then down the front pieces, because we put those basting stitches right around that trim, I'm also going to stitch right on top of those so we get that cute little pattern. And now I'm going to trim down all of these edges and turn this piece right side out. And it should be looking like this. And I also just pinned the straps in place and tried on the dress to make sure that they were a comfortable length. And now I'm going to cut them about 1/2 inch longer than where I pinned them so I have room to sew them in. Mine are measuring out to be about 7 inches long now. And I'm going to turn this inside out again. And I'm going to pin the straps onto the back piece. And then I'm going to stitch across the top here to hold the strap in place. And before I turn this right side out again, I'm just going to add a few notches around the armhole to make it lay nicer. And now the straps are done. And I really want this trim detail on the front to pop out like this instead of kind of hiding down like this. And because there's already so much stitching on this fabric, I'm just going to turn all of these edges out and pin them down and then put a top stitch right down this front edge. That looks so much nicer. And now our bodice is done. And if this v-neck is a little bit too deep or revealing for you, there are a few things that you guys could do. One would be when we first stitched up the section here in the front, instead of making it 4 inches, you could make it much farther up if you'd want to. Or the other option would be adding in some tan mesh fabric, just by taking a piece and folding it in half, and then pinning it and top stitching it down onto the front to give you a little bit more coverage. And this is what your bodice should be looking like. And now we are going to be working on the skirts. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my skirt lining pieces and fold it in half and cut a 9-inch slit into the back. And that is so that we have a place to put in our zipper. And now I'm going to bring the other skirt piece back, and I'm going to pin and sew these together down the side seams. And I'm also going to zigzag down these edges to help it not fray. And I'm going to do pretty much the same exact thing with all of the sequin layers of the skirt, by again cutting a 9-inch slit down the back and then sewing it together down either side seam. Now, because I really want this trim to be the bottom hem of the dress, I'm going to trim off all of this extra tulle to get that cute little bottom. So cute. Now to gather this piece all up, I'm going to put 2 parallel basting stitches all across the top edge. And now I'm going to pin the sparkly fabric to our lining skirt, first by matching up their sides and center seams, and then I'm going to pull on 2 of the basting stitches on the same side of the fabric to gather up the sequin fabric so that it fits into the waist of the lining piece. And then I'm going to space out all the ruffles so they are nice and even, pin them down, and then put a basting stitch around this to sew these layers together. And now I'm going to take our skirt and bring back the bodice, and I'm going to match these pieces up, marking out their centers and sides first. And I'm going to pin these 2 pieces together and then stitch them together right around the waist. And then I'm just going to put a zigzag stitch around the waist and trim it down. And now we can also take out the basting stitches around the skirt. And now we need to put an invisible zipper down the back. And normally we would have it go all the way up to the bodice, but this time we're actually going to just stop once we reach the top of the skirt. And for this, you can just use a 10 to 12 inch invisible zipper, which would fit perfectly here. But I only have a super long one on hand, so that's what I'm going to be using today. And to sew on an invisible zipper, you're just going to turn out this folded over edge on the back and iron this out so that it lays nice and flat. And then you're going to stitch right in that line as close to the zipper as you can get. And before I start sewing mine, I always like to mark the top edge where it actually hits so I know where to place it, because sometimes it can be a little bit tricky to tell. And then I'm going to open up our zipper, take the left side and fold it over, and then pin it down on top of this section here and stitch it. And you want to make sure that you're getting both the tulle layers and the lining layers. And then I'm going to take the other side of the zipper, again flip it over, and pin and sew it to the other side of the skirt. And then the zipper should disappear. And then these little top parts of the zippers I'm just going to fold over and top stitch down. And also stitch across the bottom of the zipper and chop off the rest. And now all that we have left to do is add a little hem around the bottom edge of the lining skirt. And before you do this, you want to make sure that you cut it so that when you hem it, the skirt is going to be a little bit shorter than the overlay so we don't actually see it. And here is homecoming dress number 2. I'm really happy with how this dress turned out. I've never made anything like this, but I think it's really pretty. And I love the way that the sequin fabric was catching the light, and this dress honestly feels like very Cinderella to me. I also loved the way I was able to use the bottom trim of the sequin fabric on the skirt and on the bodice, and I think those details just make it even more fancy. But I do think my favorite part of this dress is the back. I really love how that turned out. And like I mentioned, the pattern should hopefully be up soon, so I will link it in the description box when it is out. And if you guys decide to make this dress for your homecoming or whatever occasion you plan to wear it to, You guys should totally send me a picture on Instagram. I absolutely love seeing your guys' versions. And next week we're going to take a quick little break from the homecoming dresses for a different kind of video, and then we're going to jump back to the homecoming series and finish up dress number 3. So make sure you guys stay tuned. I hope you guys have a good rest of your week, and I will see you guys next Friday. Bye!